On May 2, 1981, President Ronald Reagan stood at a podium at the Pentagon and said something that stopped the room. He said, "If the story of what this man did were a movie script, Hollywood would have rejected it as too unbelievable." The man standing next to him was Master Sergeant Roy Benavidez of the United States Army Special Forces. He was 52 years old. He was missing a significant portion of his intestines. He had 237 separate puncture wounds on his body from bullets, bayonets, and shrapnel. He had been declared dead on a military operating table in 1968. A doctor had been about to sign his death certificate when Benavidez, unable to move or speak, summoned the last available signal his body could produce. He spat in the doctor's face. The doctor stopped. Benavidez lived. The Medal of Honor. Reagan placed around his neck that day had been earned 13 years earlier in a jungle in Vietnam. It had taken the Army that long to officially acknowledge what Roy Benavidez had done. By the time the country finally recognized him, the war was over. The men he had saved had grown older, and America had spent a decade trying to forget Vietnam entirely. This is the story it tried to forget. Roy Benavidez was born in 1935 in Cuero, Texas, to a family of Mexican and Yaqui Indian descent. His father died of tuberculosis when Roy was 2 years old. His mother died 3 years later. He was raised by his aunt and uncle in El Campo, Texas, picking cotton and sugar beets from the age of 7 to help support the household. He dropped out of school in the 7th grade to work full-time. He enlisted in the United States Army in 1955 at the age of 19. It was, by his own account, the first decision in his life that was entirely his own. His early military career nearly ended before it began. In 1965, while serving as an advisor in Vietnam, Benavidez stepped on a landmine during a patrol. The explosion shattered both of his legs and caused severe spinal damage. Military doctors told him he would never walk again. He was transferred to Brooke Army Medical Center in Texas for rehabilitation. The doctors were working from the available evidence. Benavidez was working from something else. He began getting out of his wheelchair in secret at night, dragging himself along the floor of the hospital ward to rebuild the strength in his legs. He did this for months. He did not tell the medical staff what he was doing until he could stand. Then he walked back into the ward on his own 2 feet and asked when he could return to duty. He returned to Vietnam in January of 1968. He had been back for 4 months when the radio call came in. On May 2, 1968, a 12-man Special Forces reconnaissance team operating in a classified mission near Loc Ninh, Vietnam, was ambushed by a North Vietnamese Army force estimated at several hundred soldiers. Within minutes, the team was taking catastrophic casualties. 8 of the 12 men were already dead or dying. The 4 survivors were pinned down, out of ammunition, and surrounded. Their radio operator was dead. They had no way to call for help. 3 attempts by helicopter crews to extract the team had already been driven back by enemy fire, so intense that the landing zone was considered unsuitable for approach. The team was going to die where they were unless something changed. Benavidez was at the forward operating base when he heard the radio traffic. He was not assigned to the mission. He had no orders to go. He grabbed a medical bag and a knife, ran to a helicopter that was preparing to make another extraction attempt, and jumped aboard without telling anyone his plan. When the helicopter got as close to the landing zone as the fire would allow, Benavidez jumped out and ran toward the survivors on foot. He was shot in the face, the head, and both legs within the first 100 meters. He kept running. What followed over the next 6 hours has been documented in the sworn testimony of the men who survived it and the helicopter crews who witnessed it from the air. Benavidez reached the survivors, organized a defensive perimeter, called in airstrikes on enemy positions, redistributed the remaining ammunition, and began moving the wounded toward the extraction point one by one. He was shot repeatedly during this process. He continued moving. He recovered classified documents from the body of the dead team leader, understanding that the intelligence value of those documents made their retrieval a military necessity, regardless of the personal cost. When a helicopter finally landed to extract the survivors, an enemy soldier closed with Benavidez from behind. The soldier clubbed him with a rifle butt and stabbed him with a bayonet. Benavidez killed him with his knife. Then he loaded the last of the survivors onto the helicopter and climbed aboard. By the time the helicopter landed at the forward base, Benavidez was unconscious. He was placed on the operating table. His wounds were so extensive, his vital signs so absent, that the attending physician prepared to sign a death certificate. Benavidez could not move. He could not speak. The only voluntary action left available to him was the one he took. He spat in the doctor's face. The Army awarded Benavidez the Distinguished Service Cross for the action at Loc Ninh. It was a significant decoration. It was not the Medal of Honor, which several of the men who had been present believed the action warranted. The reason was bureaucratic. The Medal of Honor for actions in Vietnam required an eyewitness affidavit from someone who had directly observed the act being cited. The chaos and casualties of the Loc Ninh engagement meant that the required documentation had not been properly assembled in the immediate aftermath. By the time anyone attempted to correct the record, years had passed, witnesses had dispersed, and the institutional momentum to pursue the upgrade had dissipated. The case was revived in the late 1970s when a veteran who had been present at Loc Ninh, Brian O'Connor, learned that Benavidez had never received the Medal of Honor. O'Connor wrote a detailed eyewitness account and submitted it through the appropriate military channels. The Army reviewed the case. The review confirmed that the original Distinguished Service Cross had been misclassified. The Medal of Honor was approved. It took 13 years. On the day of the ceremony at the Pentagon, after Reagan had placed the medal around his neck, Benavidez spoke to the assembled soldiers, officials, and press. He did not speak about his own courage. He spoke about the men who had not come home. He spoke about the soldiers who had died in Vietnam without recognition, without the parades and the ceremonies and the formal acknowledgement that their service had mattered. He spoke about the country's obligation to the people it sends to war and about what it means when that obligation is not met. Roy Benavidez died in 1998 at the age of 63 from complications related to the wounds he had sustained in Vietnam 30 years earlier. His body had never fully recovered from what he asked of it on May 2nd, 1968. The 237 puncture wounds left a toll that compounded over 3 decades into the chronic conditions that eventually killed him. He spent the years between the ceremony and his death visiting schools across Texas, talking to children about service, sacrifice, and what it means to refuse to leave the people beside you behind. He was, by the accounts of teachers and students who heard him, an extraordinary presence. Not because of the medal or the legend, but because of the quality of his attention to the young people in the room. The last Medal of Honor recipient of the Vietnam War was a man who had been declared dead, who had rebuilt his own legs in secret in a hospital ward at night, who had run toward a surrounded and dying team without orders and without hesitation, and who spent the last decades of his life talking to children in Texas about why that kind of thing matters. His name deserves to be known. Subscribe now. The next video goes inside one of the most consequential and least understood decisions in American military history. The moment a president authorized a war on the basis of an attack that probably never happened. Tell me in the comments, had you heard of Roy Benavidez before today? Drop your answer below. I read every one.